The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome to the Women in Depth podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lourdes Viato. Join me as we explore the inner lives of women, their struggles, fears, hopes, and dreams. We'll go beneath the surface and take a deeper look at what is hidden, unknown, uncertain, and uncomfortable. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. Today, my guest is Gina Abbeduto. Gina has been in the helping professions for the last 20 years, working as a psychotherapist and teaching psychology. Her work as a therapist revolves around the belief that clients are the experts in their own lives. With a bachelor's degree in psychology and law and society from Purdue University and a master's degree in counseling psychology from Benedictine University, Gina has practiced in various settings, including a psychiatric hospital, community mental health center, partial hospitalization programs, and private practice. She's also taught undergraduate psychology at Benedictine University, graduate psychology at Lewis University, and has facilitated training programs for Job Corps in Joliet, Illinois. Gina has over 14 years of expertise with effective non-pathologizing models such as Dialectical Behavior Therapy, or DBT, and internal family systems, or I-IFST therapy. These are mindfulness-infused models which offer clients the gift of embracing the power to change and create new meaning in their lives. Hi, Gina, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Lourdes. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited you're here. We did it.
Yay!
We've made it to this space where we're going to be talking about parenting parts. And to our listeners who have no idea what we're talking about, we are going to go into that in more depth. But I'll just suffice it to say for now that we're going to be talking about the parts of ourselves that struggle with parenting. You know, the fears, where we get stuck, where we judge ourselves and are very critical. And so we are going to be segueing into that. But before we do that, I would like you to share a little bit more about how you began to work with what we will be calling parts in our conversation.
Excellent. Okay. I started working with non-pathologizing models when I was pretty young in my career, had come into the field and noticed that there was a lot of disease model, medical model, and it just didn't feel quite right for me. And I'd been trained as a Rogerian therapist, so very client-centered, not really pathology-oriented. I was doing work with the Dialectical Behavior Therapy model and really was drawn toward the mindfulness element and really liked the idea of inviting clients, inviting myself to go to my most centered place internally and inviting them to go to their most centered place internally, and saw immediately, oh, that's where people heal. That's where, whether it's learning skills or building their insight or whatever it was, that was really the place that they were healing. With the job change after 9/11, that was really the event that changed things for us. I moved to a different area and was introduced to a colleague who was doing IFS, and it just was immediately, it sang my song. Like, oh yeah, there's always my core self. That's always there, no matter how damaged a person may think they are. And then there are these parts that take over. And so realizing, oh, there are only parts of us, even when they are really intimidating or really overwhelming, they're just parts. And so knowing that it's not all of me that's anxious, it's not all of me that's depressed, it's not all of me that's suicidal, was just such a powerful place to work with. So that's kind of how we got there.
You know, I love too that, you know, when we're working with internal family systems, and when in this conversation for our listeners, when we're talking about internal family systems or IFS or parts, that's kind of all interchangeable.
Right.
And one of the things I love about working with parts is it's not so overwhelming, you know, because it's just a part. And I love also the normalcy in it that, we all have a critical part, we are a judgy part, we all have, a sad part. And really, there are, when you look at all these aspects of yourself, it encourages you to be more compassionate towards yourself and more self-accepting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's such a gift as a therapist. It's a gift as a parent, it's a gift as a partner to know even when somebody is really activated, whether it's sitting in my office or in my personal life, to know, oh, that's not all of who they are. And even though there may be one part who's really, really angry, it's just one part, like, oh. So it really kind of soothes my own system. It gives the therapist the opportunity to stay really grounded, which for me, again, it's that place that seems the most natural and the most inherently healing to say, oh, yeah, and to even be able to language it to a client to say, oh, I have that part too. Yeah, I know what that's like when that critic starts. It's really hard. Unless we're centering ourselves, it's really hard to not be overwhelmed by it.
It's nice to know too that, like you said, we always have that core place. We always have a centered part, even though we have no idea where it is or what
That's
it's doing. We
right.
know it's there.
That's right. I think that's one of the sweetest places for clients to arrive is when it's like, oh, you're not broken. There's that part that's holding a wound, but yourself never, ever is broken. And sometimes it's really an intellectual experience for people like, wait a second, tell me, how could that be? Or how could I have gone through this and it not have broken me? And it's like, oh, there are parts that hold that, but yourself is exquisite and everyone has a self. It's our natural healing source. It's our natural leader. You know, that that is such a really beautiful opening exercise of, oh, I have it too.
And I think, one of the things I love to point out to clients, when we're sitting in the therapy space is, the fact that you're here, the part of you that made this appointment, the part of you that shows up every week, the part of you that reflects on the things that you're learning about yourself, that is all that healthy part of you
Mm-hmm.
that's doing all of that.
That's right.
Almost flipping it because a lot of times, people will look at the fact that they've been through some trauma or that they're in therapy
Mm-hmm.
as something is wrong with me.
Right. Right. And just that idea of all of this is something I really, really love about this approach too, is all of these parts, they all have good intentions. They all are really working their hardest to achieve harmony, to try to create balance. They just, some of them are really young. Some of them, they have very, very rudimentary skills, or they have really skillful techniques, but they're destructive in the process. But to know even the most destructive part, even the most pathologized part, or judged or criticized part, even it has that intention or wish to bring peace. It just doesn't have the right technique sometimes.
Thank you so much for saying that because that's a huge, huge piece of this, that all our parts are well intentioned.
Mm-hmm. Right? It's
Right.
one of the phrases we use all the time. Is like, all parts are welcome, because we know even the ones who, do very destructive things, they have this intention of, they think that what they're doing is helping survive. And quite frankly, a lot of times they have to help us survive. Getting drunk, it's not really functional when you're trying to go to work. But if it was the way that you were able to tune out the chaos of abuse and you were able to survive that moment, well, of course that part was established. So we really love and honor the parts, and we ask them, we really, really honestly approach them with curiosity of like, if you could do this without creating so much chaos or pain or suffering, would you want to know different ways to do this to help protect the person or keep the person alive? And I can't think of a time when somebody's part has said, nope. Like they want better tools. They know that they're struggling, for the most part.
From the moment I first came across parts work and internal family systems, it really created a huge shift for myself, for my own healing and self understanding. It just took it to a whole nother level. And then seeing it work with clients is just amazing. And it's quick. It's quick in the sense of, you can really shift to another perspective. because this is something that it's not difficult. You don't need to have weeks or months of long-term therapy to begin to understand your parts and begin to make small changes where you can start to feel some relief.
That's
pretty quickly.
Absolutely right. And one of the things that stands out to me of how that shift happens is the client witnesses and experiences the therapist going through this same process. It's just the process of being human. It's not the process of, oh, you have this disease or this marker, therefore you have a part. It's like, no, the nature of being human. This is Richard Schwartz, the creator of the model. He's so clear about this. And just this beauty of this is the nature of being human. Having, if you want to call them sub-personalities or different aspects or different parts, that is inherently human. We are all born with parts. It's not the product of being broken. It's actually the product of being human.
And isn't that amazing as far as so many of us struggle with that shame?
Oh, yeah.
And now you can shift to, oh, this is part of the human experience.
Right. And I just love the way you said that of like when the client is in your office and the shift happens, it's organic. It's so natural for all of the training that we do in this model. Very often, if we're, as the therapists, if we're in ourself, the change almost happens just organically, just naturally. The person's system knows exactly what to do when we're in ourself because they could just kind of live in that critical mass of self-energy of love and tenderness and curiosity. And it's wonderful. I love that recognition of it goes a lot quicker and a lot less painfully for most of us.
Yeah. And I think too, going back to what you said at the beginning, and this is a core aspect of parts work, this going back to and being in that centered place or that core self, and all of this work that you are doing with the parts of yourself, you have to be mindful. You can't do it without being mindful.
That's right. That's absolutely right. So it really is one of the things that I think is maybe unsaid. Maybe it does become verbal, but something that goes unsaid is the client knows when we're doing this work that we've done a lot of work, that we're really showing up. It's not sitting there nodding our head, coming up with a intervention or a homework assignment. While there are homework assignments, they're really much more broadly laid out, like check in with this part of you every day. One of the most moving pieces to me was one of the first times I saw Dick doing work, and he paused during the session and said, wait, I have some parts that are coming up. So he acknowledges and gives permission to the therapist to acknowledge, like, there might be something of mine showing up in the room, a fixing part or a caretaking part. And if that part shows up, I, as the therapist, am going to take care of my parts so I can stay here with you in the most self-led way, which was so moving to me to really see the humble nature of that. I'm human too. I have stuff that comes up too.
So Gina, I want to shift gears a little bit right now. And I want to kind of do like a basics, kind of like a ABC 1, 2, 3 type thing for our listeners, because we have non-therapist listeners. And, some people who just might not be really familiar with even the process of therapy. So Gina, if you can just give us a quick backdrop or rundown of some of the basic aspects of IFS or parts work.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about ourself, which is that centered, clear, curious center inside of us, and then these parts that show up. So there's 3 families of parts that we listen to in IFS. The first family of parts are called exiles. They are our vulnerable parts. They're the parts that hold pain. Very often the parts of us that are in hiding are exiled. They're just locked away as if they're in prison. And they might be related to traumas we've experienced, loss, grief, shame, any of the aspects of ourselves that they typically get stuck at one point in time. So it could be from childhood, it could be from relationships. And those parts, if we were to envision sort of like a large triangle with 2 points on the top and 1 point on the bottom, we very often, this is from a model that C-IFST uses with IFS, those exiles get locked down in the bottom of that triangle as if they're in a prison. And then above them, we have the other 2 families of parts that are protectors. So they're the parts of us who, in one category, we call them managers. They are the parts that sort of look forward and say, well, that's never going to happen again. So, in order for me to never feel shame again, my manager is going to do something. And we have a litany of managers. Some of them are taskmasters. They tend to be critical. They're very controlling. They could be perfectionistic or people pleasing, but they're the parts of us that are working and efforting to keep those exiles away. They don't want to feel that exiled pain again. And then the last category of parts are called firefighters. And I love the visual of a firefighter. They don't knock on your door and gently ask you, is everything okay inside, in real life? And they don't do that in our internal world either. These are the parts of us that knock down the door, that hose everything down. And our firefighters are also protectors, but they have a much more impulsive and compulsive nature. And so they tend to do things that may look addictive in their nature, getting drunk, using drugs, sex, porn, eating, certainly technology, where the person actually is numbing out when they're in firefighter mode. So these three families of parts, we all have them. Everybody has them. And they have this really exquisite dynamic and dance that they do. And all of their actions are there to try to alleviate our pain, but very often they create more chaos in the system. They have destructive patterns, or they interfere in relationships. While their intention is absolutely good, they're all trying to manage that pain and they take over. I mean, it's normal to have parts. We all have parts and they function for us beautifully. The part that got us up this morning and put our pants on and fed us, and those are managers. They're wonderful. But when the managers hijack the system, when they either don't feel the presence of ourself or our self isn't available, they hijack the system. And then that manager that may have been doing something highly functional becomes highly critical and becomes really intense in its focus, and it's not functional at that point. So having a goal of like, I'm going to get up and I'm going to work out today, or I'm going to eat healthy today, or I'm going to do my best at my job, is a wonderful manager goal. And when some of that exile energy starts churning beneath, like, oh, I'm not good enough, or I'm feeling shame from a look that somebody gave me across the office, then that manager goes into overactivity and it might start criticizing me, like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you working harder? Or a good worker would do this, or, something in that really intense, extreme, and radical voice that shuts down the system.
Hypothetically, let's say that we have a mom
Mm-hmm.
who is struggling with not feeling like she's enough in whatever capacity that is. So that sense of not being enough and not being lovable, acceptable as she is, that I'm imagining her, that part is the exile, the part of her that is enough.
That's the exile.
Okay.
You got it.
And then in order to protect that exile, she throws herself into overactivity in the sense of signing up for stuff she doesn't want to sign up for, saying yes to committees and volunteer stuff, and trying to be super mom and doing it all because she doesn't want that part of her, the exile, who is enough to be hurt.
That's exactly right. So there's that exile that holds the fear, that fear of I am not enough. And it could come from a life experience where either that part received the message, I am not enough, or it could come from a projective fear, like, oh, I don't want to be the mom who isn't enough. And so we just listen to that, because you're exactly right. That's precisely how our managers show up, which immediately brings compassion for the managers, like, oh, they're trying so hard. They're trying so hard and working so hard.
Mm-hmm. Working really hard to protect that exiled part.
That's right. I was going to say, and that's very often where we'll start to see it functions pretty well for a while. The system works until it doesn't. the method works until it doesn't. So that protector that I'm going to keep doing and keep taking on more, and certainly can relate to that as a mother myself, of like, I have a lot of irons in the fire, and it works until it doesn't. And then if it's suddenly something in either the internal or external world breaks down. My car breaks down, or I have a child who's sick, but I've already overcommitted to do X, Y, and Z for PTA or for Girl Scouts or whatever it may be. Then that's typically where we see those firefighters show up. And they can show up in a way that mom now shuts down, or she goes into really high agitation and rage, or she's maybe having a couple of extra glasses of wine that night, or whatever it may be. But it's I just need to numb it out. The language we use very often is, I get hijacked. And it's like, oh, the manager was working pretty well until it broke down. And then once it breaks down, that's when the firefighter enters the scene typically.
When, since we're focusing today specifically on parenting and the fears that come with parenting, and we've talked about it, I think a big part of this just in this example, the not enoughness that comes with that. What are some of the parts, do you think, that are the common parts that show up when mothers, and fathers are doing this parenting thing? They're just kind of part of the normal parenting experience.
That's right. There's so many. So I just pulled a handful. And I think I'm going to start with a few that might be a little bit older in their orientation. They've been around longer. And so one of the really common things we will hear from parents is this promise that they made to themselves. Like, when I am a parent, I am never going to, and then you fill in the blank, right? It's like,
I'm laughing.
Please, I don't know a parent who does not hold that part. And again, it could be like a very adolescent part, maybe a teenage part that felt very restricted by his or her parents. And they made a promise to themselves, like, I am never going to restrict my child in this way. So they could actually come from parts that were neglected. But it's, for me, one of the ways I listen into that is there a part that fears repeating their own parents' mistakes or ruptures? And, again, all of us as parents make mistakes. So I don't want to in any way, falsify like, oh, there's the parents out there who didn't make mistakes. We all make mistakes. That piece of the ruptures that didn't get repaired are the ones that very often I find in that statement of, when I'm a parent, I'm never going to do this. And so that feels like a really common one for me.
Yeah. And I think too that, when you put that kind of pressure on yourself of, I'm never going to do this, and it's connected to your own, whatever the experience was.
That's right.
When you do it, because you will.
Right.
Then there's this sense of failure and shame. Like, I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do, what bothered me so much or what hurt me so much. And here I am doing it to my own child.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So shame, in every example of parenting parts, for me, it feels almost assumed that there will be shame there, because it is. We all, as parents, have this wish to put a child into the world who's going to contribute to society and be loving and kind and all of these things. And very often, if we listen to what is that wish about, there's a lot of fear that lives right under the surface. There's a lot of shame of doing it wrong. So I love that access to go, oh, wait, what's going on for me there when I say I'm never going to do that? Because it might have, in one pathway, it might have to do with, oh, am I still holding wounding from the way I was parented? And then in this other way, how is that fear or that wound then impacting how I'm parenting? So I think that's one of the common fears that I see. I don't want to repeat my own parents' mistakes. I don't want to do the thing that I promised myself I would never do. And quite honestly, parenting now, while I know technology, every generation there's new technology, there's been such a leap with technology in this last 20 years, even in the last 10 years, with high-speed internet, with children having immediate access to things, that very often there are scenarios going on for parents today that they have no map, because the challenges they're dealing with and the conflicts that they're dealing with their children didn't exist in prior generations. There was no bringing your phone to bed when we were growing up. There was no phone to bring to bed. There wasn't a cord long enough. So, that there's so many elements that once that shame is there of I'm doing it wrong or I don't know what I'm doing, it just gets perpetuated by the adjustments in technology, the adjustments in society, where there's no map to follow. We can't look at, dinner time, which dinner time may have existed for generations, but now we're looking at monitoring what websites your children go on. It didn't exist when we were growing up. So there's a lot of pitfalls for that shame.
So what are some other parts that you've noticed or you've seen in your work?
Another very common fear that I have watched with parenting, both as a therapist and a parent, is that fear of being judged or shamed by other parents. Now with the very high visibility of social media, and not just for children, but for parents to feel that constant audience. Like I might be somewhere, somebody might be recording me, I might be in school and somebody is noticing me, that sort of constant watching of my own behavior. And quite frankly, noticing my judgment of other parents. That's another element I think that's showing up that for me feels it's a little bit newer, but that fear of the parts that hold those fears around being judged by other parents, and not just judged maybe in the traditional way of somebody else might hold this opinion, but that it might be on social media now, or maybe there's an image of me or a story being told about my parenting that just didn't exist in the past.
Right. Like even, when you are, out in public and you need to discipline your child or get them under control.
That's right. There's a lot less anonymity, which it has its benefits. We could notice like, hey, I see that mom over there having a moment. Maybe I can just walk over and be kind to her or offer some support. But the other reality of very often, and certainly we see this in our media with shows like Black Mirror, where they show this, again, it's fictionalized, but the idea of, we pull our phone out before we go in to intervene to say like, hey, are you doing okay? Or offer some assistance.
And I think too that, because one of the things with social media is we see the Facebook, Pinterest lives that are presented, okay, which then we look at our own lives and can't help but compare. I think too, then because there is so much also good information out there that this is healthy development. These are some ideas for helping your children to become more kind. You just feel this more pressure because now you have so much information that, I should read these books because this will help my child become more compassionate. And we should do this activity because now they can actually have hands-on experience helping others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
And also, I didn't name this initially either, which is that sort of falsification of how everybody else is doing it right. The idea of I went through 47 pictures before I put this picture up on Facebook or Instagram or whatever it may be. And so, I love this concept of like, we're watching everybody's highlight reel and we're assuming that's their day-to-day life. And it's like, I yelled at my child today, or I sent them to school with a granola bar and we called it breakfast. And those pieces of, it feels like everybody else has it together and I don't. And that truth of like, everybody is walking their own path. So the beauty of social media and the beauty of access to information and access to just seeing other people, I feel like it needs to come with a Surgeon General warning of what you may see may not actually be what it appears. And the other thing is you don't have to be an expert in every corner of the globe on parenting.
And I think too, with this, what happens with social media, another byproduct of all of this is unconsciously or consciously looking out for those likes and those, the shares, the thumbs up, like you're okay. We approve of you. And again, pulling you so far from your core, that centered place where you bring and give yourself your own approval.
That's right. That sense of I know, again, if we go back to the basics of some of our parts, and if we have parts that hold wounds around feeling like they were not enough at any point in my life, if there is a wound around I'm not enough, and I click on one of those social media portals, and it seems like everybody else is more than enough, it just crumples that part. And again, sends our protectors into overdrive. Okay, now I need to volunteer more. Okay, now I need to be a kinder voice, more kindly voiced parent. Or now I need, and it just perpetuates the system of thinking that we're not enough, when the reality is like, oh, again, this is more of a psycho-spiritual approach, but you have absolutely everything you need. And just slowing down and noticing, even when we make mistakes, I think the most valuable thing for our children to experience is us making mistakes and us apologizing and us asking for forgiveness, or us saying, you know what, I thought about that. I think I want to try it a little bit differently this time. And I think that kind of connects to a part that I see a lot with parents of this feeling of, well, they want their children to be strong enough or tough enough in the world, or they fear being compassionate or being self-led makes them less of an authority with their children, or less of a source of solidity, or this is how the world works. And the reality is, like, we do our best. There is no set guideline. I would assume if that book was written, somebody would be really rich of this is exactly how to parent. So you're going to do the best you can, because there is this divine combination of you and your child. And there's a lot of wonderful advice out there, but ultimately, for me, the most meaningful component of parenting is keeping connected. So from one child to the next, your parenting should be different, because that child has different needs, and you have different needs as that child's parent. A child who is very affection seeking is probably going to need very different parenting than a child who is not, because we want to meet our kids where they're at, and we want them to know you are exactly enough, whether it's tough enough, strong enough, smart enough, compassionate enough, lovely enough. You're exactly what you're supposed to be.
And I think that, when we as parents can, through our own experience and example, teach our children to be connected to ourselves and our own parts, that is also what ensures that, what you're describing, that connection, because I can connect to you because I'm connected to myself. Your child can see,
That's
wow,
right.
that was mommy's angry
That's
part.
right.
Now the child can look at themselves and say,
Exactly.
this is my angry part.
Exactly. And, I'll use a personal experience of, I have a daughter who has a pet snake. And very sadly, our pet snake left this earthly world this week. And that moment of just stopping and checking my own parts, because of course she was very sad. This is her beloved little snake. Why we have a snake, I won't go down that trail, but she wanted a snake. But she loved this little snake. And it's really tempting for a caretaking part to show up to tell her it's going to be okay, or snakes don't live forever, or any of those little anecdotal commentaries that would actually clip her sadness, because it's uncomfortable for me as the parent for her to be sad. But instead, just offering that invitation of, like, just come here, and just consoling her. What she needed at that moment was just to cry, just to be held. And that reminder of, like, oh, again, for the parent, you don't have to fix it. You don't have to make her feel better, because right now she doesn't feel good. She feels sad. And so just love her sad parts and let her love her sad parts. So then, she could have that relief. And she can also have the place for asking questions and correcting some of the misbeliefs. So her immediate response in that scenario to me was, what did I do wrong? And just that relief, oh, sweetie, you didn't do anything wrong. We only have, every life only has so much time. We all have an expiration date. You did it just fine. And just being able to nip that in the bud of, like, oh, I totally get why you would think you did something wrong. But in reality, we don't have control over all the life forces on this planet. And just that tenderness of, does that make sense? You know, a lot of the parenting invitations that I offer when I'm working with a parent, especially if I'm working with the parent and the child, is just really to slow down and get curious. Like, oh, is that what you thought that meant? And you just get to go through this distill and pace of, let me make sure I heard that right. Oh, you thought you did something wrong, and that's why this happened. But oh, yeah, I get why that thought would be there, but that's just not right. And the slowing down, and it's such a relief for parents to know you don't have to have all the answers. It's actually a functional part that can say, I don't know that answer. Or I'm not sure why. And kids actually find so much more relief in that. And than trying to come up with some,
It's so true. Yeah.
fabulous answer that explains it all in a way that the kid probably wasn't even asking for in the first place.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. And this is so helpful as we shift into, what can parents start to do to become better at noticing, acknowledging, and working with their parts and the parts of their children. I think one huge thing that you can do, which it sounds so simple, but it's so powerful, is just acknowledging and allowing the parts to be. There is something, it like lowers the intensity. It's almost like you're not pushing back against that by saying, oh, it's okay.
Right.
We'll go do something fun,
Right.
and that'll cheer you up.
Right.
Like in regards to your daughter.
Right. I was going to say,
like,
it's such a birthplace
let's go get some
of
ice cream.
Firefighters, right? Oh, here, let's go get some ice cream, or hey, let's go play this game, or hey, and it's our own parenting firefighters of, I have to numb out. We can't feel this feeling, and the truth is like, oh, you could feel it just fine. This beauty. One of the things I really appreciate from the dialectical behavior therapy world was this recognition that emotions only last a handful of seconds if we don't recharge them. So if it's like, oh, I just make the space for that feeling. You're really angry. When I'm working with parents with really little kids, I remind them little kids aren't going to have a lot of words, but they have great mastery of their body. So if they're angry, ooh, grunt with them or stomp your feet or really engage them in that way of like, is that what it feels like? And there is this very simple cue that I love with IFS that I really try to invite as much as I can, which is just ask, is that what that felt like? Or, oh, did it tell you this? And kids get that so clearly, whether they're 3 or 23, like they get that. Like, wait, let me stop. I love the way you said it, Lourdes, which is like, just kind of slowing it down and getting the insight or listening to them. Because that's all it is. Like, we all want to be heard. All of our parts are seeking witnessing. They want to be witnessed.
Yes. And I think too, just my own experiences, the times when someone has reflected back to me what I'm feeling, whatever it is. And no matter what state that is of sadness or anger, frustration, like it just lifts that burden and becomes lighter, and nothing has really shifted.
Right.
There were no solutions, but just for someone to kind of say,
right.
I see you, I see what you're feeling. There's something profoundly healing in that.
I love that. And, and I also like to invite parents to imagine, was there ever a time where you felt this way as a child? And especially if it's at a similar age, and then it's like, and what did the world tell you to do? Or what did the world bring to you when you were sad, when you were angry? And it's such a beautiful insight creator of like, oh, nobody held me and said, cry all you want. And so the message I received was, hold those tears in, because if they release, you're going to be flooded. And again, just the eloquence and the very simple and at the same time eloquent and complex nature of the messages children receive and interpret.
I love that. I do a little twist on that wording. I ask,
I love that.
When have you been here before? But again, it also helps them to see, this is why this is so powerful, because this part of you has been around a long time.
Oh, right.
It's been working really hard since you were 3, 5, 8.
What a beautiful acknowledgement.
Yeah.
And again, very often parts are initially, you could see if this is your experience. Sometimes when parts do get that validation and that gratitude, that appreciation, like, thank you so much for working for Lourdes for so many years, that the part is like overwhelmed. It's such a beautiful experience to share with somebody when it's like, that part does work really hard.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was probably one of the trainings I went to with you, or one of the things we had at the center. And you gave the example, or it was a technique where after you acknowledge and allow the parts to be there,
right,
then just gently asking them to step back.
It's really
oh, that's powerful.
Fun. I mean, it's so lovely to watch.
Yeah,
This part,
fun.
we'll use a really extreme protector like rage, or, just almost like a dissociative part that just takes the person out of the room or won't let them focus. And this tenderness of just, appreciating how much work that part has done over the years. And then asking them, would they be willing to step back? It's so powerful to me that parts, when they authentically feel appreciated, will step back. Protectors will step back. And if they won't step back, this beautiful honoring of saying, I get that you're not ready to step back. Is there something you're afraid will happen if you step back? And that's usually such a immediate, this is the immediacy of this that I love, is when you ask that part that question, and it really authentically feels you're interested in it, it will tell you, I'm afraid if I step back, Gina's going to be flooded. She's not going to know what to do. It'll be too much for you as the therapist. It will be too much for her as a parent, and she won't be able to go on and carry on and parent, which is another fear that I work a lot with parents. Is I'm afraid if I deal with my system, I won't be available to take care of my children. And it's like, oh, you know what? Exact opposite is true, but I get why it thinks that.
So, Gina, this has been such a insightful, compassionate, wisdom-filled conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for everything you've shared. If there is a mom or a dad who has been listening and they have been struggling with maybe, feeling like a terrible mother or father, feeling overwhelmed, feeling shame about how they have or haven't responded, what are some words of wisdom that you have for them?
Well, I would start first by reminding them that's the nature of the beast. I don't like the idea of parenting being beastly, but that's the nature of the experience. Like that's built into experience is, and honestly, it's the burden of a part, because it's that part that questions ourselves or doubts ourselves or feels like they've made mistakes that actually awakens the part of us that goes, oh, what am I supposed to do next? How am I supposed to fix it? So it's actually a part that's trying really hard to make sure that we're doing it okay. And the reassurance I give parents is you're doing it the best you can do, and we're going to give you some tools to help you do it better. So it's just a really simple dialectic of you're doing it the best you can do, and that's enough. And we're learning new ways. And it's just really gentle. It's if I could only give parents one tool, if they are only available to receive one thing, I would say just be a little more curious. If there's something that's showing up for you, it comes from someplace, and it always has good intentions. So just be a little curious, like, oh yeah, that part of me that yells. If I get a little curious, like, what is it trying to do here? What's its intention? It almost immediately will show me this beautiful, loving message. Like, I want my children to be good people, or I want them to know they're responsible for being kind, or whatever it may be. Even when the delivery is flawed, it has a good intention. And so just reminding parents, you're doing the best you can do. We can always continue to work on it. And the truth for me with parents is you deserve to heal any wounds that remain from your own experience being parented.
Thank you, Gina. That's beautiful. And I know that that's going to be very healing and helpful for lots of our listeners. If someone's listening and they want to learn more about your work or possibly work with you, what's the best way for them to learn more about you and get in touch with you?
There are a couple of websites. They could go to integratedwellnessnv.com, NV like the state of Nevada. They could go to my personal website, which is ginaabbeduto.com. If people want to learn more about internal family systems therapy, I would encourage them to go to selfleadership.org, which is the home for internal family systems, and they could find resources, books. They could see training dates and events like that. And they could certainly always call my offices at 702-278-5364.
And I also just want to say again, you do not have to be a therapist, a psychologist, or any type of mental health professional to begin to learn about and use parts in your parenting and in your life.
Absolutely. And, I always go back to the very simple commentary that we often will say, like, a part of me wants to do this and a part of me feels like it has to do that. And, that polarization, I feel like, is the center of most parenting conflicts. Like, I want to be this loving mom and sometimes I yell. So just reminding parents that's the path that we walk, and there's so much relief out there, and just be kind to themselves, be kind to their parts.
And Gina, we will put all of the links that you mentioned in the show notes so that listeners can find them. And again, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much, Lourdes. Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
All right, take gentle care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Women in Depth podcast. I hope it brings you a deeper understanding of yourself and others, and that you found some insights that illuminated and inspired. You can follow Women in Depth on Facebook and YouTube, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. And finally, if you enjoy Women in Depth, please share with a friend. Again, thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.